Documentation Matters, Human-Centered AI System to Assist Data Science Code Documentation in Computational Notebooks. I'm April Wang, a PhD candidate from the University of Michigan. This is an internship project done together with my internship peers and mentors at IBM Research. Computational notebooks allow data scientists to express their ideas through a combination of code and documentation. Unfortunately, data scientists often write messy and drafty analysis code in computational notebooks, as they need to quickly test hypotheses and experiment with alternatives. It is a tedious process for data scientists to then manually document and refactor the raw notebook into a more readable computational narrative. Thus, many people neglect to do so. Many efforts have sought to address the tension between exploration and explanation in computational notebooks. For example, researchers have explored the use of code gathering techniques to help data scientists organize clustered and inconsistent notebooks. These efforts focus on cleaning and organization of existing notebook content instead of creating the new content. Another line of work looked into linking chat messages as documentation in collaborative data science space. However, this approach is limited to real-time collaboration scenarios where data scientists discuss frequently with each other as the notebook evolves over time. We began our project by asking, what does a well-documented computational narrative look like? To answer this question, we first conducted an in-depth analysis of how data scientists document notebooks. Publicly shared user notebooks on GitHub are often not well documented. Thus, we look up to a special set of notebooks, the highly voted notebooks users submitted to Kaggle competitions. We sampled 80 highly voted Kaggle notebooks and conducted a qualitative content analysis to explore their documentation practices. We replicated the notebook-level descriptive analysis by Rule et al. As shown in the figure. The left side represents the descriptive visualization of the Kaggle corpus, and the right side represents the GitHub corpus. We find that the Kaggle corpus has more total cells than the GitHub corpus. The Kaggle corpus has a roughly equal ratio of markdown cells and code cells per notebook, while GitHub corpus is unbalanced with the majority of cells being code cells. Notably, Kaggle corpus has more total words in markdown cells than GitHub corpus. This result indicates that the highly voted Kaggle notebooks are better documented than general GitHub notebooks. Second, data science documentation covers a broad range of topics and purposes. We coded 9 categories of documentation in the markdown cells. For example, process describes what the adjacent code cell is doing. Headline is the styled headline for organizing the notebook into separate sections. Result describes the output from code execution, and reason explains results or critical decisions. Lastly, we find that notebook documentation interplays with the stage of data science lifecycle. We coded markdown cells based on where they belong in the data science workflow. Based on findings from the formative study and design insights from related work, we design and implement Themisto, an automatic documentation generation system that supports data scientists to write better documented computational narratives. Themisto is implemented as a Jupyter Notebook plugin. Each time the user changes their focus on a code cell, the plugin is triggered. When a user clicks on the button next to the code cell, Themisto will suggest documentation generated by 3 approaches, which we will elaborate later. If the user likes one of these 3 candidates, they can simply click on it, and the documentation candidate will be inserted above the cell or below it. Themisto generates documentation from 3 approaches. Our formative study suggests that systems should be able to generate multiple types of documentation. Some types of documentation can be directly derived from the code. Thus, the automated approach can help. For example, the process type of documentation directly describes the coding process. We trained a deep learning model using the graph neural network architecture. These GNN models can take both the source code structure, which is extracted as abstract syntax tree, and the source code's content as input. Thus, it outperforms the traditional sequence-to-sequence model architecture, which only takes the source code's content as an input sequence. Next, our formative study indicates that the well-documented Kaggle notebooks often have description of frequently used data science code functions for educational purposes. Thus, we implement a query-based approach that curates a list of APIs and their descriptions from commonly used data science packages. Lastly, some other types of documentation, such as descriptions of the results, are not directly related to the code. We designed a prompt-based approach for users to complete the generation process. To evaluate the effectiveness of Themisto, we conducted a within-subject controlled experiment with 24 data scientists. The task is to add documentation to the given notebook, and each participant is asked to finish 2 sessions, one with Themisto support and one without. Our study found that Themisto can support data scientists in generating documentation. For the sake of time, I would like to elaborate on 2 key results from the study. First, Themisto supports participants to easily add documentation to a notebook. As shown in the table, we compared the task completion time and participant satisfaction with the final notebook. The results have shown that Themisto improved participants' performance on the task by reducing task completion time and improving the satisfaction with the final notebooks. The post-experiment survey results supported our findings. Most participants believed it was easier to accomplish the task with Themisto's help. Looking to the post-task interview data, participants reported that Themisto provided them something to begin with. Thus, it was easier than starting from scratch. The second finding we would like to highlight is that co-creation yields longer documentation and improves the accuracy and readability. Through coding the video recordings, we find that while Themisto is available for around 80% of code cells, participants checked the recommended documentation by clicking on the light bulb icon to show the drop-down menu. Notably, around 40% markdown cells were co-created by Themisto and human participants together. This finding inspires us to further explore how participants co-create the documentation with Themisto. By looking at the log data, we discovered several editing patterns. For example, many participants added supplemental details to Themisto's suggested documentation. Participants also added stylistic edits, such as polishing sentences and changing conversational tones. All right, if you're interested in more results, please read our paper. In summary, inspired by human documentation practices learned from 80 highly voted Kaggle notebooks, we design and implement Themisto, an automated documentation generation system, to explore how human-centered AI systems can support human data scientists in the machine learning code documentation task.